You can forget a lot of things, Foster Care Nation, but never forget this. You're listening to Unparalleled Studios.
I signal.
Foster Care Nation, listen up. This is
Foster care and unparalleled journey.
strength for the powerless, courage for the fearful, hope and healing for wounded hearts. Hello and welcome back to Foster Care, an Unparalleled Journey with Jason, and still no Amanda, guys. Sorry, we just have too many things going on, and she is the responsible adult today, and I am left to play on the computer over here and interview somebody because I am really good at talking. She's really good at getting stuff done, so that's why I married her, because she is so much better at stuff than I am. And so we have with us today not Miss Oklahoma. That was Morgan Wolf. We talked to her just a few months ago. Today we have Mrs. Oklahoma, Spring Gray, with us. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you, Jason?
Oh man, we are doing okay. Nobody's been in a real fist fight yet today. Nobody's well, I can't say nobody's thrown up. We've got a little bit of a stomach flu going through, but you know, okay. It's been really low on the trauma level. So I'm going to call this an excellent day. How about yourself?
Success, yeah.
Yeah, that's success looks different in this world, I think, than it does in a lot of other worlds.
Especially when you have kids.
Yeah. Especially when we have kids of trauma, and life does what it does sometimes. So we're just happy that we don't have anything big happening right now. So everybody knows we talk about foster care and adoption. So how are you joined into this world?
I'm actually an adoptee. So I was adopted at birth from my birth family to my adoptive family.
Okay. Yeah. So now, did you come through the foster system, or were you adopted through an agency?
Actually, neither. It was a very, very private adoption. My adoptive father worked and owned a law firm, so they did all the paperwork, and my birth family kind of did around the house work for my adoptive parents. So biological father mowed the grass, and a biological aunt was the house cleaner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is unconventional for sure.
It's very, very, very. So
did they continue to, throughout your life, did you grow up with them, working around the home?
Actually, no. Pretty much as soon as I was born, they split and went back to Detroit, Michigan, where biological mother is actually from. She's from Detroit, Michigan, and we're right outside of Detroit. I call it Detroit because if I tell you where it is, unless you've been there, you're probably not going to know. It's a really small town. And I actually never saw her again until 2015.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Your accent does not betray Detroit to me.
No, Appalachian Mountains, really small town called Grundy, Virginia.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just thinking that didn't really fit with the sound of your voice.
No, it does not.
Yeah, that's okay. For a little while, I lived in the hills of Tennessee, and again, the hills of Tennessee.
Yes.
I think we were only 30 miles outside of Nashville back in the 80s, but you could have been in the Appalachian Mountains out there, because I never met my closest neighbor who lived out there. We were in that part of the country.
Same. I think my closest neighbor was probably about 4 miles in the mountains, which, that's about 15, 20 minutes of gravel road. And I was not ever allowed to go up that fork of the holler.
Yeah. Hey, I know what a holler is. I'm feeling you're speaking my language.
I am. Yes.
I dated a young woman when I was from home, but when I was in the Army years ago, and I was stationed in Texas for a little while, and I wasn't there long and all. And the first thing she starts like, "Why are you talking weird all of a sudden? Why are you talking with this accent?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's coming back," and it does. Yes. It does for sure.
It does.
Yeah, we can't hide from it. Especially when we get around folks who speak a lot of Southernese to us, and it comes back. Or if you screw around and accidentally put a plate of fried green tomatoes in front of me, They're gone.
Yeah.
Look at them.
Yes.
Nobody makes them quite like they do in the South. That's for sure.
Very true.
So you have this interesting adoption story that, where your parents, your bio parents, they were well acquainted, I assume, at least with your adoptive family. And
they were, yes.
So how did that come? I mean, or do you even know the story of how that all came up?
Well, very interesting. I'll just put this out right up front. I actually do not have a relationship with my adoptive mother anymore. We've not spoken in just over 8 years because a lot of the things that I was told growing up happened to, I apologize, that's the cat feeder, giving treats to the cat. But growing up, a lot of the stories that I was told about my birth family happened to not be very accurate. And the birth of my son, as well as a few things that just didn't add up, made me really go on this journey of finding my birth mother. You've got children, so one of the first things that they ask you when you go to the doctor after you find out you're pregnant is family medical history, and that was something that I had no idea about. It was always kept really under wraps. Information about my birth family from adoptive mother. She was very controlling. She wanted to make sure that she very much had a savior complex. So she had 3 biological sons, my brothers. They adopted me. And then later on, they actually adopted 3 other sons who lived with us, but were older than me. So I actually have 6 older brothers.
Wow.
So I kind of need a diagram when I get to talking about who is who and how does this relate. So it was a little difficult sometimes trying to figure out what the truth was and wasn't. But from what I've gathered, speaking to my birth mother and my birth father, is that it was very well known in the small town that I'm from that my parents wanted to adopt. They wanted a little girl. They wanted to adopt a little girl. And so when my birth mother became pregnant, they just approached my parents and said, if it's a girl, do y'all want her? And here I am.
Wow.
Turned out to be a girl.
Yeah, I guess that's convenient.
It was convenient, yes. And, as most adoptees know, and anyone involved in adoption, there's a lot of trauma that goes on, especially with a mother who has mental health issues. There's a lot of mental health that she doesn't seek help for. So that's the main reason for the no contact. You got to set boundaries. You have to protect yourself. And now as a mother, you have to protect your kids from any kind of toxic lifestyle, anything going on there. So it's been for the best. I'm extremely thankful that I was adopted because I'm extremely close to my brothers. And then I was extremely close to my dad who just passed away last year. So I'm very, very thankful. But with that comes along a lot of trauma.
Oh, yes, it does. Yes, it does. Amanda, my wife and I, we're an adoptive family. So we have 4 kids that are adopted right now. And, we need that Venn diagram sometimes to describe who all of our kids are because we have 2 biological siblings that we did adopt.
Okay.
And we have 2 other kids who we adopted. One of them is my wife's half-sister's little boy.
Wow. Yes. Diagram.
Yeah. We get into relational algebra at some point, you have to carry
That's a good
line.
way I like that. I will use that.
Yeah. It's difficult, for a lot of people don't, because some people have this idea of family as just, the people who share your direct DNA and they have not opened their mind to exactly what family can be otherwise. And so it's really difficult.
Yes, it is. And especially trying to explain that to someone who's not involved in the adoption triad, it can be, as soon as you start throwing words out like biological, you've lost them. So I have 2 biological half-sisters. So, you just start going into this, exactly like you said, how did you word it again?
Relational algebra.
Relational algebra. I love that. I'm definitely going to use that because that's good. That's really good.
Once you've gotten into the depths of how many different ways people can be connected, it's not an easy task to keep that, figured out and straight in the mind. And sometimes, it takes 5 minutes to describe to some people just how many different ways we are actually related to our children. And that's why I just call them my kids.
Just kids. Yes.
I mean, legally speaking, I have biological step kids. I have had foster kids. I have adopted kids. And one was kind of a kinship type deal. It's too much to explain it.
Right.
At the end of the day, if you live in my house and I have called you my kid, you've crossed into that world of people that, I'll kill somebody for, if I have to, like you're in that world, and that's all that matters. You're now officially my kid.
Yes.
I'm willing to do time for you. That makes you my kid.
Right. And that's something that I wish more adoptive parents would understand is don't put the adoptive son or adoptive daughter in that, because that was something I feel like was a huge trigger for me growing up. My mother would always refer to my brothers as her sons, and then it was me, the adoptive daughter. Or Spring, we adopted her. It was very much, hey, I did this thing. I want you to recognize and notice that I adopted her. And what she didn't realize, and I don't know if she'll ever realize, is that's really traumatic, because these are my brothers, and they have never, and they still never treat me any different. And I mean, they probably love me more than their blood brothers, their blood siblings. And for her to make such a difference, it was very conflicting for me as a kid. I mean, I actually studied psychology in college because I knew there was a lot of things that just didn't add up as far as how we were raised and the different things. And sure enough, mental illness was a huge factor in those. But I was actually having a conversation with one of my brothers, and I was telling him I didn't really understand why with her I always felt like an outsider. I always felt like the adoptee, like the adopted kid. But with my brothers and my dad, I never felt that way. And it was just like the light bulb. He said, well, sis, that's because we never treated you any different. She did. And it was like, so it wasn't really something that was my fault. I felt like that because of how she treated me, not because of something I did. And that's something, so I have an adoptees group here that I facilitate in Oklahoma. And that's something that I've come across a lot with adoptees that feel, especially if there's biological siblings in the home that you've been adopted into, there's that conflict sometimes. And it's something that I let them know, hey, this is what my brother told me. And it registered. It really registered to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's good to hear that you had somebody in your life who was willing to pull your hair and pick on you.
Well, all my brothers wrestled. So I have 6 older brothers total. And so they all wrestled. So of course, I mean, I was like the crash test dummy for them. I mean, I loved it because if the boys could do it, sis could do it too.
Of course.
And so, like I said, I mean, they've never treated me any different. And it's sad to me when I do see siblings that are treated different, even if they're not even in the adoption the realm or anything, and parents treat them different. It's just heartbreaking to me because I do felt like I was treated differently by adoptive mother. But I'm just so thankful that I had my brothers who were always, my biggest fans, my hero, my protectors, and then my dad, who was just, the greatest person I could ever imagine raising me.
And the other side of that, one thing that my older boys, my 2 older sons are out of the house now. And my second oldest son once told me, like, when we first jumped into this foster care thing, it was new and exciting and all that. And when we talked about adoption, they thought that was an awesome idea. And somewhere along the line, they got the idea in their head that we were adopting kids because they weren't good enough. And I went,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, psychology is an interesting thing, It
is.
Understanding how the human brain kind of works. I mean, because none of us will ever truly understand how it works. That's a mystery for God.
Yeah.
Because I don't know about you, but most of my kids, I think, are a little bit crazy. Don't tell them I said that, though.
I think I've not met many sane people in my life, and I've been around the world. I've done a lot, and I've not met many sane ones. So they're pretty rare.
Yeah, I currently have 2 little ones on the other side of that wall over there. I don't know if y'all can hear it or not, but they're showing their insanity.
Just a little.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a good thing this podcast is all about kids and helping kids, because otherwise I'd be worried about trying to filter all that out later. It's not
Yeah.
coming out. People are going to hear it because I have a lot of kids and they're a lot crazy.
Yeah, that might be why you're crazy, is because they've made you crazy.
I don't know. I think I started that way.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I started a little bit nuts. I mean, we're the ones who stepped into this voluntarily. So
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
yeah, I feel like I have to take some responsibility for my own insanity.
Yes, you brought it upon yourself.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. So now, curious, did you grow up knowing the adoption story, or is that something you found out along the way?
I did. It was always, that we always, those old time photo albums that you peel back and you stick the pictures on and you slide it back. After a while, you can't open them anymore because they've kind of like melted to each other. So we had one of those that had a lot of different cards and letters and pictures from what I always referred to as the biologicals, because it was both from mom and dad's side. So there was pictures, there was cards. I believe there was even some kind of announcement in the newspaper. So I would often go into the hall closet and pull that out and just kind of look. Unfortunately, it was kind of discouraged at some points if I had questions. And, you can always sense as a kid if you ask your parents something and they really don't want to talk about it, like they get that tone. So I was oftentimes given that tone. But I always knew it was kind of a joke. I loved Cabbage Patch dolls, and adoptive mom actually used to collect them for me. So I was born in 83. So I have them from 83 all the way up till, I guess, until they stopped making them. And it was always said that I was found under a Cabbage Patch leaf out back. So
that's an interesting way to put it. I have our youngest son he's adopted, and we're very open with the stories with our kids, because unfortunately the foster system, you only know what you know. You only know the information that you get handed, and some of it that is pretty sparse. And for his story, we really don't know his story. And so we've given him as much as, age appropriate that we can, but he has a whole story. He sat and told me the story of his adoption one day. And as somebody with a little bit of a psychology type background there, I was wildly interested to know, because I don't know if you follow the Jordan Peterson. He's a psychologist from the University of Toronto, and
absolutely.
He talks about archetypal stories and things like that, and so this kid one day, he tells me the story of how he was adopted, and he says that his mom and dad were trying to get him, were trying to get him and keep him safe and keep him away from the snakes, because the snakes were coming after them. And so they climbed up and they put him in a tree, and then they had to fight the snakes. And then they were killed by the snakes, but they managed to save him. And the foster care people came and got him out of the tree and brought him to our house. And that's how he got here. Now, the archetypal story is like the fear of snakes. That's one that I'm like, wow, that's so true. That guy's kind of a genius, but at the same time, absolutely none of that is anywhere close to true. But it's a story that he made up on his own that we've told him what we know, but we don't have much connection. We didn't have much connection throughout that case. They were kind of, they would show up at meetings and court stuff, but that was about it. And we didn't have much contact available there. They weren't looking to make themselves available for a whole lot of extra contact. And so, we don't have much to give him, but he made up his own story because it was that important to him to feel like he knew where he comes from. So I didn't argue with him with his story. Plus, he was about 3 when he came to me with that story. And I don't know if you know this or not, but you cannot win an argument with a 3-year-old. So
you'll lose every time.
Every time.
And it also sounds like I'm not sure how old he is now, but at the time he was very much trying to make it seem like his parents were heroes for, they were absolutely not going to be the bad person. They are going to be the good person. And that's just his optimistic brain, a kid's brain. They never want to think bad of their parents. That was something that I struggled with, because I had this adoptive mom who is very, very abusive, but she adopted me and she was supposed to take care of me and all this stuff. So it's very conflicting for a child to have this person who's supposed to take care of you and love you and protect you, but then they do anything but. So it sounds like his brain, that's like a defense mechanism for his brain to come up with this story where they seem like they're, they've done the best for him.
Yeah. And most of the kids we have know a decent portion of their story. As a matter of fact, his next older brother, he is 8 now. Frankie's 7. And so his next older brother is 8. And like, we know his story. That's the one who is my wife's half sister's half sister. So
okay.
We know his story from a family perspective. And, there's lots of parts and pieces we can talk about. And the older 2 kids that we had adopted, we knew their story fairly well. We still have some connections with some of their bio family.
Good.
And, that's been something we've been able to hold on to some pieces of that.
Right.
Spent quite a decent amount of time with their grandmother until she passed a few years ago. And so those places we're able to give them like real life stories about that.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to have some kind of knowledge of your history and where you come from. I mean, up until I was pregnant with my son at 30, I really I didn't have a lot of desire to meet or to really know much about my biological family. There was a few health concerns that I was curious about, but other than that, it wasn't until I was pregnant with my son that I thought, I should probably look into finding out who they were. Is there any kind of medical concerns that, I might want to look out for? And I mean, honestly, it was that, but as I went through the process, I waited till my son was born. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm extremely close to my brothers and my dad. I also have another woman who I call my real mom. I know everyone kind of, especially when you're in the adoption realm, it's like, okay, who is that? Well, who I call my real mom, her name is Becky. She is my son's BB, and that is, of course, my husband's mom, and then her are his grandparents, his grandmothers. And so I spoke to my brothers, and to her, explained, hey, I'm really thinking about seeking out my birth mother. Here are my reasons why. My one brother was like, you don't have to have a reason why. You can just do it because you want to do it. It's like, my concern was I didn't want them to feel like they hadn't been good enough brothers or that they did not fulfill that sibling, space for me. That had nothing to do with it. So it was great that they were so supportive of me going on this journey, because truth be told, if they had not been supportive, I would not have done it. It's like, they mean everything to me. They have just always been there through a lot in my life. So I'm just so thankful they were really supportive of that. And I hired a private investigator. It took him 3 days to find her. And in a car, I went to right outside of Detroit, Michigan.
Wow. We live in a world where we can find people so easily, either that way or even through some of the DNA test companies like 23andMe or Ancestry.com. It's amazing how connected we can be in this world and find biological families so quick and easy that just wasn't a possibility for the generation behind us.
I know. And that's so sad. And I'm, of course, and you probably are too, part of so many adoption, something to do with adoption on Facebook, like all the different groups. And I love to read the stories where they've done the 23andMe or the Ancestry.com, and they have like a direct biological parent. And it's like, whoa, the chances of that happening are pretty slim. That was definitely not the case for me. I had done both of those tests, more so to find out. I live in Oklahoma now. I've lived here since 2006. This is Indian country. There are Native Americans, just everywhere. This is, where so many of them live. And I often would get asked, am I Native American? It's like, no, I'm Scottish and Irish. And then, on the inside, it's like, well, I really honestly don't know. I have no idea. It's like, it's what my dad always said. I've got the green eyes. I have some red hair when I get out in the sun. I'm really, really white without a spray tan. So I'm probably Scottish and Irish. So I went ahead and I did both of those tests, and I'm Scottish and Irish. I wasn't too awfully surprised. but to see that happen where people make these connections based off of, their DNA is just pretty incredible.
Yeah, I've done the same test, and I don't think my test results were quite as identifiable because everybody has always looked at me my entire life and asked me those important questions like, what are you anyways?
Yes.
I am what you would call ambiguously brown. I can be just about anything you want to imagine. And I have been. I've been called every racial slur you've ever heard, I think, except for maybe some of the Asian slurs. Other than that, I've been called pretty much all of them. I've been called a terrorist. I've been told to go back to my own country with hate and malice and in my voice. And when I was in the Army, still had a nice high and tight, fit and trim and 40-inch step, the whole 9 yards. I mean, it was obvious I was military. Every airport I walked into, they wanted to do a bomb residue test on me. It was a random test. It was a random pull. But I'm like, you people are kind of getting a little crazy with your randomness,
Yes.
The crazy part is
time you fly.
That was pre 9/11 actually. And even at that point, I still saw a lot of that. And so I eventually did do the 23andMe test, and it came back with a picture of Europe and a great big circle. And it said all of that.
All of that. That's good. That helped a lot, didn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I know that it had a lot of the European area, and I hear some rumors that we probably have some Spanish influence in our blood, because my grandma, who always swore she was German, her middle name was Juanita.
Okay.
I'll let you figure that out because she was born back in the 30s, I want to say, and I don't know many people who are picking Latin names in the 30s for their German kids, but that was the thing. And I know that somewhere back in the family history, there's a lot of Irish or Scottish there. That it was McDonald's. We've got a lot of that in the family somewhere. So I just tell everybody that we're Black Irish because it's a mix between Spanish and Irish. And
hey, it works though, right?
It does, because it confuses them and they don't know what Black Irish is. And so and
they're not going to ask any more questions after that.
But yeah, it's people make their assumptions based on the area, on what their experience is with people. And for kids who are adopted and trust me, I've had that conversation with my mom because both my mom and dad were very, very white. And I'm like, all right, so is there anything you want to tell me? Some kind of family secret? What's going on here? And because I do not look like a lot of the rest of the family does. And so, and as we've gotten older and all the kids have kind of actually matured more into adults, I'm like, okay, I see more similarities now between me and a couple of my siblings or one of my cousins specifically, where I go, okay, there's something in here that is not the pure German that my grandma always tried to convince us of. But for me, it was family, and we were just regular, normal old biological family, nothing special, nothing extra there. And that's the way I was raised. And so I had that sense of belonging, but something that a lot of adopted kids don't necessarily get to experience as well. And so how have you handled that as you walk down those roads?
I think growing up, one of the things that I would do is really convince myself that I looked like my family. There's a picture of my dad's mother, and 15 years ago, I would have swore that we were twins. And now looking at the picture, it's like, no, that was just me trying to protect my heart. And so funny thing is my dad, when I say dad, I obviously mean adoptive dad, just to clarify, but he's my dad. His nickname was Red because when he did have hair, he didn't have hair most of the time that I was alive. It was red. And all of his biological children and his biological grandchildren all have red hair. So in the summer, if I'm out in the sun quite a bit, I'll get one or two little red peeks through here. Adoptive mom used to actually say it was my horns coming through. She might not have been too off base on that one, but I would hold on to those red hairs, and it's like, oh, I'm just like, my maiden name is Robertson. And so it's like, I'm holding on to those Robertson genes, holding on real good with those little red hairs. So I think growing up, I really tried to connect as much as I could. It could have been falsely, in hindsight, just as, a defense mechanism. But I very much felt, since I wasn't redheaded, and I really didn't look like any of my brothers. I mean, especially one of the boys that was adopted, he is Dot Indian. So we look nothing alike. Funny enough, we act a lot alike though. So it's very much a nature versus nurture, in my opinion. So I feel like I latched onto a lot of that just to kind of protect my heart. But it was very difficult growing up, and in a small town, everyone knew I was adopted. So at school, I didn't exactly make the best choices, because if someone would say something about the fact that I was adopted, and, my real parents didn't want me anyway, I may or may not have snapped back and said, well, you were an accident. So, it's like, you just try to, protect yourself. And that was what I did. But it was pretty hurtful growing up, but my brothers were always very assuring of, hey sis, if you need me, I can come down to the school and take care of, because it was always boys. I could take care of myself with girls. But I mean, it was kind of difficult, but now I have my son, and it's kind of freaky to me to look at him and see so many similarities, because growing up, I didn't have that. And so seeing him and just seeing like some of the motions that he does with his face or his eyes or his mouth, he's 8. So he's very expressive, just like I am. And it's just like, to me, it's just mind blowing how strong genetics can be.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that nature versus nurture argument has always been an interesting one to me, because I think the real answer is yes, both and.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I have kids who use some of my the same phrases that I use, and I see things and I'm like, huh, I see me coming out in you, and I know that's not nature, because I know I wasn't there for that event, and but we so much of that we pick up and we hold on to it. And even when I've talked to my stepmom, sometime back, we were talking one day, and she stopped and she says, because I lost my dad back in 15, we lost him to some, no, get this right. It was November of 14. And she looks at me and she's like, wow, you remind me so much of your dad sometimes. You sound just like him.
Yeah.
Now that he's gone, there's one part of me that wants to hold on to that. And then there's another part that's like, no, don't say that.
Right.
But yeah, we give so much of ourselves to the kids in these ways. And hopefully it's the good stuff that we give for the most part.
Yeah.
So, your adoption story definitely had its difficult parts there, right?
Right.
It had some parts that were really hard. And so, as an adoptive parent myself, and to whoever else, in the audience who's an adoptive parent, like what would be your best pieces of advice if somebody was raising a kid who wasn't biologically theirs? How can you make that the best possible scenario for them?
I think one of the most important things is to be extremely upfront and honest. Like I shared, I've always known that I was adopted. So it was not a thing of, oh, I turn a certain age and boom, surprise, we were hiding the secret. Because I do know people that's happened to, and it was devastating to them. Like everything they have known for 20 years is that a lie? And so I think that is the very first thing. I think the second thing is patience. I don't think a lot of adoptive parents understand how much trauma is involved. Even as an adoptee, there was so long that I was in the fog and didn't really realize it. Didn't realize how, I don't want to say damaged, but kind of damaged I was, and how, even with my psychology background, I sought therapy and went to counseling and really had to work through some of those issues that I obviously felt were my fault, that were not. And just, coming to grips with the reality of this is the truth and this is what's not the truth. So as far as being an adoptive parent, I think having grace with your kids is going to be really, really important, because they're already feeling a lot of feelings that they may not know how to process. They may not have, depending on when they came to live with adoptive parents, they might have not have been taught coping skills. I know that was something I was never taught. I did not know how to cope with my feelings. And I have really strong emotions. I'm a really emotional person. I will cry. Ooh, you can look at me a certain way and like it will trigger something and I will just cry. Sometimes it's a good cry. Sometimes it's not a good cry. And so I think being accepting of counseling and therapy is the second most important.
Okay, guys, this is as good a place as any to stop and talk about this. We're talking with Spring Gray about the need for some counseling and therapy and people to help us with that. The other side of that is that we need community. We need people who are like us, who've been through some of the things we have. And that's what me and Amanda are trying to build here on the side a little bit. We've had a couple people sign up already. And if you haven't heard from me yet, I'm sorry. I just waiting to kind of fill up a little bit of a group here. And I'd love to be able to start this group where we can have a small community of foster or adoptive parents who are going through some of the same things, who have similar lived experiences, and have some hope to share with others and some empathy in those hard moments. So if you're interested in all in a group like that, email me at jason@fostercarenation.com and let me know that you're interested in the foster care group. And so we're going to jump right back in with Spring Gray. Thanks a lot, guys. I hope to hear from you. Oh, yeah, you and I are both talking the same world there because Amanda couldn't make it to the first interview that we did today because she had a kid at a therapy appointment, and she's got to take another kid to another activity later on, and she's going to take all the kids with her because we have a parent meeting with a psychologist that another kid sees, and so that's a big part of our life, you know. You know, one kid has two separate therapists because one does play therapy and the other therapist does equine therapy.
Okay, good.
So yeah, we're just, you know, we point that in any direction we can, and we really chasing whatever help we can find in that way because it's the trauma adoption is real, and it's something that as an adoptive parent myself, we don't want to hear that. Right. I mean, let's be honest. If you've adopted a kid, like, especially if you did it, you know, with the right reasons in mind, you just want to help these kids.
Right. Well, as adoptees, we don't want to accept the fact that we've got trauma and we've got baggage and we've got these issues. You know, it's like we're in denial for so long, most of us, that when, like I mentioned, the fog, it's like when you come out of it, you're like, man, if I just kind of accepted this earlier, like how much further along could I have been? I mean, it wasn't until I was 22 or 23, and my husband and I, we had been dating for a little while, and he said, girl, why are you so angry? And I was like, you know, I mean, I'm in the relationship with the man that I know I'm going to marry. I'm a licensed minister. I, you know, have an amazing relationship with God. I felt like I was happy, you know, and I really deep down was not. I was a very angry person at the things that had happened to me, that I had just kind of sucked it up, pushed it down, bottled it up. And when he spoke that to me, it was just one of those moments where it's like, you know, I kind of am angry about this. And that just, I bet in hindsight, he wished he had not have asked that, because I mean, just all these things came up and out, and it's like, you know, I think I should probably talk to like a counselor. And it started out, I went to Oral Roberts University here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I talked with a couple of the counselors there. And one of them was like, you might want to actually see a psychiatrist. And I was like, what are you trying to say? You know, and it's like, well, just to be honest, I think you need to work with someone that's more familiar with adoption and all of that, because she was getting lost. I mean, what it amounted to was she was getting lost in all the, you know, here, there, and who's this and how does this relate? And so for me, it was really, really important to find someone that specialized, or at least had some knowledge of adoption, as far as working through the trauma and going through therapy and working out the issues and the kinks.
Yeah, finding the right therapist is ridiculously important, and I'll bang that drum until the end of days, because I had my fair share of stuff that I needed to work through, and Amanda, my wife, grew up in a house that was a drug house. Okay. It was not uncommon for her as a young teenage girl to get up and get ready for school, and there was a nude man playing the piano in the living room, high out of his gourd. Right. As you might imagine, she had her fair share of trauma growing up.
Yes.
Drug houses tend to do that, and
Yeah.
so she I had started reaching out to a guy, and I went to saw this one particular therapist, and I'm not going to say he was a horrible therapist, but he was a horrible therapist for me. It was
Right.
not the right match, and I reached out to a few people that I know and got a couple recommendations, and found the guy that I was like, all right, we're going to go try this dude instead. And turns out Dr. Tom is the right guy for me and for my wife as well. And that was awesome that we found a guy that worked for both of us. And he has been he's been a regular monthly part of our life for the last 3 or 4 years now, I bet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been so helpful to have that third party who can speak into both of our lives,
Right.
And when we had my oldest son, his wife, when she was around a lot, and we talked a lot, and one day she asked me, she said, "Do you think I need to see a therapist?" And I'm like, yeah. She had a very traumatic backstory, and one of the more traumatic ones that I've seen, and with having had like close to 30 kids come to the house, that's saying something.
Yeah.
Her story was that traumatic, and she looked at me like she was offended, and she's like, "What, do you think I'm crazy?" I said, "Nah, not any crazier than me. How about that?" I see a guy, this about me. I see a guy on a regular basis. I think it's important because you've been through hard stuff, and having somebody help you process that is always valuable. And for her, that's something that, I believe last I heard, she was kind of getting, starting to open up to that idea, but we'll see how that works out. But man, we all need some help from somebody who knows more about life than we do.
Yeah, and I think it's really important in a marriage. That was something that, I have obviously abandonment issues. Mine are twofold. I had a birth mother who, placed me for adoption. And then I have an adoptive mother who, did all the things and everything to me. And, so it's kind of like a double abandonment. So of course I've got abandonment issues. So something that our therapist has been great about is explaining things to my husband. And he's got patience of Job. God, when I say God made him especially for me, he surely did, because I don't think anybody else would be able to handle all that came with me. And he's a good guy when he's got all of your brother's approval. Like all my brothers approve of him and love him. And, we've been together 15 years and they talk to him more than they do me a lot. So I do have conversations with them about that often, like, hello, sister, me. But, our therapist is great about, explaining, how I feel, because there's times that I really can't put into words, like what I'm feeling, how, I'm trying to process these things, especially with the abandonment issues to him. And she has been really great about navigating that for us jointly, so that he doesn't just think I'm more wackadoo than I am. A little bit's okay, but we can't let him know how much. We got to keep that under the wraps.
Yeah. Amanda and I had a conversation once. It's been a few years ago now. And I asked her, I'm like, at what point in our relationship did you finally understand, like when I said forever, I meant forever, that an argument wasn't going to mean no, because she has no real connection with her biological father. He was not a good guy in her life. She met him twice, and both were bad and painful and horrible experiences. And so, I'm like, when did you start believing like I meant what I said? And she thought for a minute, and she said, it was probably about 10 years in. And I was like, what? It took that long? Like, but I had no idea at that point she was still dealing with all that stuff.
Yeah. I think that's definitely some conversations my husband and I have had. He said the same thing, like, because at growing up, if there was an argument, I was never allowed to have a different opinion than adoptive mom. No one can. If you have a different opinion than her, then you completely disagree with everything and there's no relationship. She very much has a relationship with one person at a time, and that doesn't last very long. And it's just like a rotating door of people in her life and out of her life, as well as her children. Like there's not relationships with her and most of her children. And it's a really sad life. But me seeing that, it's like, I'm very assertive. I am, very extroverted. But with my husband, it's like I feel like I couldn't disagree with him on some things, because if I did, then he's going to be gone. And that was something that we had to work through as well. It's like, you can like Frosted Flakes and I like Fruited Pebbles. It's okay. Like, the world's not going to end if we disagree. And I say that, but realistically, that's how it was growing up. I mean, my dad worked all the time. He was a very successful attorney and businessman. So he was, I don't want to say absent, but he was just busy providing, an amazing life for us. So, he didn't see a lot of that. And there was not a lot of arguments between them because they weren't together that often. So that's been something that's been a process as well in our marriage.
Narcissism is a difficult one to deal with.
It is. Yes.
I don't know that I hold the power to diagnose your mom, but my PhD in psychology, it's hanging on the wall over here. You can't see it, but I wrote it myself with crayons.
Oh, okay. At least you got your favorite color.
That's it. Yeah, I say a lot of times I have the experiential PhD in psychology, just because because of all we've seen, and it's been one of those things that, I mean, I've even had to kind of apologize to my older kids. I'm like, yeah, look, guys, I was young when you all showed up in my life. I knew nothing. You were being raised by a dumb 20-something-year-old. What was I, 20? Oh, I was probably 22, 23 years old when I was, first became dad to some people. And that's kind of, you're not terribly smart at 22, 23 years old, I found.
No, you're not. That frontal lobe hasn't developed yet.
Yeah,
not fully.
I remember my son coming over one day, and my little guy was having a meltdown in the other room, and I called him in here, and I let the air out of my little seat here, my office chair, so I was down on his level, and we got down there and had a conversation with him. We just kind of broke down what was going on and got him calmed down. I'm like, all right, yeah, okay, so we're good now. He's like, yep, yeah, and he's fine. I'm reach out, boom, give me knuckles, boom. He runs off to the other room and continues playing. And my oldest son looks at me. He goes, where the hell was this guy when I grew up?
Still figuring it out.
That's what I said. You were building him. You hadn't finished building him yet. I didn't know what the heck I was doing yet. I was just a great big dummy who was trying to raise kids the way that I thought I was raised, and I didn't have it figured out. And now that he is, well, he turns 24 here, and I think no, he just turned 24. That's a different kid who's got a birthday coming up. He just turned 24 a couple weeks ago, I think. And I'm like, look, do you realize that, like, I was raising kids at the age you are now? And he's like, yeah, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
I think you're lucky you survived. Do you remember Lilo and Stitch? Yeah, you're experiment 626. That's
amazing.
Yeah. But I mean, we don't realize that in those moments. I thought I knew what the heck I was doing, and I didn't have a clue. And his story specifically, because Amanda and I got together, and she already had him. He was from a previous relationship. Biological dad had bounced, and she was raising him more or less, trying to take care of things on her own to the best of her ability. And I showed up. He was 2 years old. He just started calling me dad, and it was dad forever and ever, amen. Until that one day a few years ago when we got a phone call that said, I just got an interesting phone call from a guy. He says he's my stepbrother. And, we always were looking for the right time to have this conversation, and it never would present itself because, our life has been fraught with many, many struggles and traumatic situations and things. He dealt with some depression stuff as a teenager. So every time we thought we I think we're in a pretty good place. We might talk with him about this soon. And then something big would happen and we would put it back off because it wasn't the right time. And a kid who's dealing with any kind of, depression or suicidal ideation stuff, like that's a big wrench to throw in that gear. And we never had, we never felt like we had the right moment. And so for us, when that moment came, it was not like we had planned it, like to sit down and have a conversation. It was a moment where this all just kind of blew up in our faces. And I'll be honest with you, at the end of it, I was like, finally, everything's in the open there. I no longer have any secrets left in this world.
Yeah. And he took it well, I assume?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, before we got off the phone, that's the thing. My wife was really concerned about that conversation,
Right.
and he could tell. I mean, he knows her. That they share a lot of that nature versus nurture. They share a lot of the nature in that one, and
Yes.
he said, Mom, this changes nothing.
Right.
Right. I just want you to know that this changes nothing, but I mean. It was just part of our story that we had to go through, and that's why when I talk to people, I ask about whether or not you had heard that story when you were a kid and how it was handled, because we didn't do it the best way possible. Now, mind you, it was my wife didn't adopt him, I did, because I was the stepdad, technically speaking. All my kids are just kids, and that's what's important to me.
Right. I mean, that was something that I was very much that I expressed to my brothers. And my real mom is, listen, like, if I do, because I wasn't actually sure if I would be able to find my biological mother, because I had a first name and that was it. I did not have a last name. I knew what hospital I was born in. I had been told she lived in Michigan now, but I didn't really have a lot of information. So when the private investigator came back after 3 days, was like, hey, I think I found her. I'm like, oh, and she had remarried. She had adopted 5 kids. I mean, my biggest concern was not coming into her life and disrupting what was going on there. So I actually initially reached out to my half sister and kind of like, hey, remember me? Because she had reached out to me years and years. I mean, I was maybe 16 or 17 when she had reached out to me and wanted absolutely nothing to do with her. That was the last thing I needed as a 16 or 17-year-old girl. That was just not what I needed. So I actually reached back out to her and, explained, hey, I would like to meet with you. And my birth mother's name's Jackie, meet with Jackie. But I do not want to come in and cause any kind of issues. Like, I was told she was remarried. Does he know about me? Does he, what's the dynamic there? And she had been very upfront with him. He knew about me. They basically had been just sitting and waiting for 20 something years for me to give them a call. So,
wow.
Yeah. And so it went really well. It was one of those moments when I finally met her and hugged her for the first time. It was just kind of like, well, this is, my biggest concern was waiting and maybe something happening to her and her passing away before I ever got the chance to meet her. And then you live with that regret. So I'm very, very happy that I got to meet with her and, spent a little time with her. I went back and visited a couple times and, I would definitely suggest for anyone that is maybe on, teeter-tottering on whether or not they should seek out their biological family, do it. Don't have any regrets, because you never know if you reach out and they've already passed, or, you just never know. And then you'll always have that regret.
Yeah. But it's fear, right? That's the thing that keeps us from so much in our life. And, I think it was actually one of the Jordan Peterson things I was watching one day, and he talks about how the treasure you seek lies on the other side of your fear.
It does.
And
it really, truly does.
Yeah. But none of us, I'm just going to say one of my bigger fears has no treasure on the other side, and that's called heights. I'm not jumping out of any airplanes. I don't like to get on the roof and clean out the gutters. Christmas lights, they are one ladder high, and that's it.
That's it. Okay.
My big fear is that they don't hold any treasures on the other side, I promise. I'm just terrified of that one. But all the things that we think can be so damaging to us, that's where we find the real treasure, and, for me, one of those things for me, honestly, was I grew up in a church that, to be polite, I'll just, the way that I saw it, I did not agree with what they taught, and it felt fairly judgmental, and it felt very much like they forgot the verses in there that talked about love, or they maybe didn't know what that word meant. And definitely been to those churches. Yeah, so I grew up in that world. So when I left that, I decided I was just going to be an atheist for a while, and eventually figured out I did not have enough faith to be an atheist. And I started to believe that the agnostics maybe had something figured out, because to say you can't possibly know, well, I can talk to you people a little easier. And as life would have it, God has this way of reaching out and getting a hold of people. And so I've been on a faith journey for quite a while, and really, really found a much better place. I know you mentioned that you were a licensed minister.
Yep.
So I'm curious, how has faith played a part in your life? Is that something you grew up with, something you found later in life? How's that played out?
So I was always raised in church. I was actually raised in a Pentecostal holiness church. Up until I left to come to Oral Roberts, I was raised in the same church, up the holler, the same little holler. And, we very much believe in, signs and wonders, and that, God's got a reason for everything, and that it is, very, very spiritual church. And so it was really interesting when God sent me to Oklahoma. I was kind of like, I don't really want to go to Oklahoma. Rob Parsley has a church, or has a school in Ohio, which is much closer to Virginia than Oklahoma. And so my son just got home from school. You want to come say hi? Hi.
Hey, bud.
Okay, go be quiet. I'll give you your iPad a little bit. I'm actually using his iPad to do this.
Okay.
So God actually sent me to Oral Roberts, and I grew up always saying I would never marry a pastor's kid. I would never date a pastor's kid. And so God laughed. And my husband's a pastor's kid, and so his parents are pastors, and so we're really involved in his church here, and then also a couple other churches in the area.
There's an old song by I believe it was Van Zant, and the line I love is, "If you want to hear God laugh, just tell him your plans."
And that's exactly how I felt when it's like I didn't want to leave my family in Virginia, and so. But I knew that my husband was here in Oklahoma. And so I met him 3 weeks after I'd moved here, and we've been here ever since. So I've always been, a huge believer. I don't want to say that I'm a religious person, because those were the ones that crucified Jesus, but I'm a huge believer in, God is real, and there's absolutely no coincidences in life. My husband and I have talked about just things in our life that, one little thing would have completely thrown off the trajectory of our life together and what God intended to happen. So I'm just, I've always been raised in church, and, continue to believe. And I feel like that's really what got me through a lot of the trauma as a child, is just my belief in God, and knowing that God had a bigger purpose for this. And now as an adult, I can see, I was strong enough to go through that. God knew that I was strong enough to go through that. And now, like today, I can share my story, and as a survivor and as an adoptee.
Yeah. And my favorite part is that you can tell your story and help other parents who have adopted kids in their life and understand how to do it better.
Yes.
Because, we saw generations of kids who were maybe adopted, never found out, never knew about it, or that they didn't until they were in their 50s or 60s maybe, and it was always hidden and pretend like it wasn't a thing. And it's just so challenging as we come into this world that we're in now, where everybody thinks like the viewpoint is different.
It is. It's more acceptable now.
But our lives aren't different. The people who we grew up around, how we grew up, is not necessarily different, and we've had to learn how to handle this.
Right.
Nobody's ever done much as far as helping us figure out how to do this properly in our life, and that's part of the reason why we have this podcast, is so that people like you can tell your story and inform the rest of us. Like I when I ask questions like what would you say to parents to do properly, how you can do this properly, it's because I can tell you how we did it. I can't tell you it was the best possible outcome. Right.
And it's going to be different. The kids, you're going to know your kids best, hopefully. So, I know that we've thought about adoption. We've talked about adoption. We've talked about fostering. I would love to do respite care. We've actually talked to our son about it. I mean, he's 8 right now, and it's something that in 2, 3, 4 more years we are definitely going to look into. But for me, having a biological child and then maybe bringing in another child, that's not biological, that's something that we have to have conversations with as well with our son. And I mean, we started having conversations about, possible fostering 2, 3 years ago. So he was 5 or 6. And so you're going to know your kid best, but I 100% think that being open and honest up front is the most important thing for sure.
Yeah. Because we can deal with just about anything if we have the truth to deal with.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Dealing with lies, though, that makes it so difficult. And I mentioned with our son, like dealing with that story was so very difficult. Me personally, one of my core values is honesty.
Right.
And, I made it a point to never make any statements that were not 100% true. Now, I can't say that I didn't allow deception to continue on in that time frame, but I had to live with that. And I'd be honest with you, as I walked through that, like that affected me. That really affected me. And so just having that opportunity to be 100% honest. And even one of my other kids who, my wife and I's biological son that we have together, after the whole, the rest of the story came out, he asked a question. He said, so what other stories are you hiding, Dad? And I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like, I can't even be mad at you for asking that question.
Yeah.
I mean, he knows that. Here's a great irony, because when my wife and I met, she was still legally married. Our oldest son's dad had bounced and was not part of our life and never had been, and so we had to fund the divorce, and then we had to fund the wedding as well, and that took money, and that took time.
It did, yeah.
For a young family, I mean, we were already raising my wife's half sister. And then we had, our oldest son, and then the second oldest, our biological, came along. So right off the bat, we're raising 3 kids on like $20,000 a year.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of money and to come up with, and not a big pot to draw it out of. We didn't have any money to fund a divorce or a marriage or adoptions. And I eventually ended up having to adopt my own biological son, because in the way the state law is written, she was legally married when he was born, and they would not put my name on the birth certificate.
Yeah. And that's something that definitely needs to be changed. That, and also the cost of adoption. I mean, it's just it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that these agencies are making money off of. I mean, these attorneys are making money off of. And, we hear politicians complain about, all these children, they don't have forever homes. They're in these orphanages. They're in foster care. If you would make it more affordable, I mean, it would be much easier. The cheapest way is through fostering to adopt, but that takes time, and then these kids you're not guaranteed to be able to adopt these kids either. So the system is messed up for sure.
Yeah, it's a broken system for sure, but I don't think we're going to unbreak the system anytime soon, mostly because we screwed around and let humans be involved in it. And if humans are involved in it, it's going to be broken.
Yes. And when money's involved, get a little corruption happening.
Yes. Money and politicians, and they don't always, look out for the best interests of the right people. And, unfortunately, kids are the ones who deal with most of the problems out of that, because, I mean, let's be honest, they don't have a vote in the political system.
Nope.
And I'm not convinced that we wouldn't be better off if we let toddlers, elect some of our politicians.
We wouldn't be in worse shape, that's for sure.
Well, I'll tell you what, I believe kids have a much better judge of character than most adults do.
Yep. Toddlers, drunk people in leggings.
Yep. It's funny because I can be in the grocery store, and, for the listeners that can't, who are just listening, if you haven't seen a picture of me, let's just say that people don't always look at me and make great assumptions. I am ambiguously brown. I have a weird, actually today it looks horrible, but I have a mohawk shaved into my head. I've got tattoos all over me. I've got a long black beard, and I can be in a grocery store, and a gal will be there, have her little daughter there, sitting in the cart or the buggy if you're from the South.
Buggy.
Had to get my Southern lingo going there, but have a little girl sitting there, and I'll be getting something off a shelf, and the little girl will smile at me and wave and all that. And mom takes one look, and she's nervous. Next thing, she's in the next aisle. She's hurrying out of there, and I'm like, yeah. Here's the thing: that little girl, she sees through all my BS. She sees. Yes. I use some of these things just to. It's more peaceful life not to have to deal with some folks, but that toddler sees through it all. Yeah. You know,
they sure do. And they'll tell you the truth too. You ask. I mean, even my 8-year-old. You ask him how do I look today? Ooh, you better be ready for the answer because they will tell you the
truth. I'm glad that's not just my kids.
No, that's all kids.
Yeah, mine are pretty honest with it, unless there's cookies involved. Unless there's who ate the donut, right? That
doesn't count. That's cheating.
We still have half a donut that was unaccounted for this morning. I don't know where it went. Yes. I've decided that it doesn't really matter too much, but yeah, so just figuring out what kids really need and allowing us as adults to put that as our first priority. That's so difficult for so many people to do that. And it sounds like you've got a couple people in your life who have done that for you.
They really have, yes. Very, very thankful for them.
And you mentioned, that whole coincidences conversation, and I'll be honest, I'm of the opinion now, I don't think coincidences really exist.
No, I truly don't believe they do, because, you just think about certain things and how if just one little thing deviated, that would have messed up the whole path. So I just can't believe that it's a coincidence and that God didn't have his hand in, certain, especially things in my life for sure.
When we moved down to Tennessee to live out there, we moved in with my grandpa because he had terminal cancer, and we stayed with him till he passed. And as I understand it, we were supposed to get the house after he passed because we moved from Missouri down to Tennessee to take care of him. We were supposed to get the house. Either he got rid of the wrong will, or he'd never put it in, or whatever. There was a lot of weird family dynamics in that family. So whether or not that was how it all worked out, I don't know. All I know is that when I was in the second grade and we were supposed to get the house after he passed, and it didn't happen, and we ended up moving back here to Missouri. And my mom it was her family, my mom's side of the family. She was pretty angry about that for a lot of years. And I look at it and go, wow. But I thought I was supposed to grow up in White Bluff, Tennessee.
Yeah.
And if I had, how different would that experience have been? And how many kids' lives would we have been able to impact that way? Very true.
Very, very true.
God has a plan, and I'm not certain we get away from it most of the time.
No, you can only run so far. Look at Jonah. We just had VBS last week, and that was something my son was learning. And it's like, Jonah thought he could run from God. He ended up in the belly of a big fish. So
for 3 days and 3 nights.
Yes, for 3 days and 3 nights, my son says.
Yeah. Hey, it shows that it worked. He learned the story.
Yes.
But, so many of us are so busy running away from that thing that God wired us to do. And so for the folks out there, I hope that, maybe they can just be a little bit more inspired to actually decide that this is what they want to do. They want to step in and help somebody, because that's what they've been told they're supposed to do. That's what God wired them for.
Right. Very true.
Well, Spring, I want to thank you for telling your story today.
Thank you.
You have one of those really unique stories that people have a hard time knowing these things about how to handle this stuff properly, how to handle this stuff in a way that can actually be beneficial to the kids involved. So right. Thank you for taking some time and sharing your experience with our listeners.
Well, I thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, Foster Care Nation, thank you for listening to Spring's story. Now take her knowledge and wisdom to heart so you can create love and healing in your family and community. Be sure to come back next week. We have new episodes every Tuesday. If you would like to share your story as a guest, you can reach us at jason@fostercarenation.com. You can connect with other like-minded people on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/fostercareuj. And don't forget, we have an account over at Buy Me a Coffee. It's like a virtual tip jar where you can help us fund our mission for as little or as much as you want. It's at buymeacoffee.com/fostercare. The links to everything are in the show notes in your podcast player or at fostercarenation.com. And, as always,
You are so super awesome. I think you guys are cool. Yeah. Thank you for listening. Thanks.
Unparalleled Studios.